company that is considering interacting with the free software community, these are some of the mistakes that I have seen companies make, and these mistakes can really poison your interaction with the free software community and prevent it working well. So I thought I'd mention some of these mistakes. A common thing that companies do is they decide, yes, we're going to release something as free software, but let's delay the release. And so every time we release a new version of our product, we'll make the source code for the product come out 6 months later, right? We'll have some proprietary release, the delayed release. And I think that the reason they want to release it as free software often is because they want to get other people to contribute, right? They want to get people to contribute to the project, and yet they're a bit scared that if they release it as free software that nobody will buy the product. And so they have this sort of delayed release in the hope that people will buy it in the first 6 months. Unfortunately, that can lead to far fewer developers joining the project because they don't really feel as though the company is committed to the free software project. You're trying to attract people to do work on your product for nothing. And doing things like delayed releases doesn't show the level of commitment, perhaps, that you really need to convince people to work on the program. So some companies have done that, and in general it has not been very successful. They find that the community doesn't have a high uptake, people don't get really interested in the project, and they then think, oh, free software doesn't work. Registration for download, this is another one that can kill things. People have an amazingly low threshold of boredom and of interest, I guess, when they're interested in possibly using some product and they hit a web page where you have to register your email address and your name before you can download and use it, right? It reduces the number of potential users by an amazing amount. Even if the web page is incredibly simple to use, it still reduces it. Why do you think it reduces it?
People don't like giving out their personal information.
Don't like giving out their personal information, yes. What else? Although those same people, if they download free software somewhere else, they might be quite happy to join a mailing list providing exactly the same information. Yeah? Why else?
Spamming.
We're worried about being spammed, receiving advertising. Yes, that's what fake email addresses are for. But there's other things as well. Think about the distribution channels for free software. Why does free software get so widely distributed and used? Because people can just give it to each other, and because you can go into things like a package manager, you can find the package. When you're looking for packages for Ubuntu, how do you find them? You do a web search or you do a Synaptic Package Manager, you look for something in that category, you look for some keywords. If it requires registration to download and use the package, it won't be packaged in the standard distributions. It can't be because those distributions give out an untold number of CDs, and you can be sure that they haven't pre-registered all the recipients of those CDs. All right? So the registration can kill the FOSS distribution model. So why do companies ask for registration?
They want to get that feedback as to how many people and who and where.
That's right. They want to get feedback on how many people are using it, often because they're trying to justify to their own management why they should release it as free software. So in order to justify it, they want to get lists of who's using it so they can show those lists to management and look, we've got 100,000 users and they're all making these great contributions. Isn't that proof it was the right decision? Right? But you'll find you'll get a lot fewer users if you have that registration page in the first place. So the act of trying to prove that FOSS is a good way for your company to go may kill it and may mean that FOSS isn't a good way for your company to go. Okay? Company name on all contributions. The FOSS world is very much a world that emphasises credit, but it emphasises credit to individual programmers, not to companies. Individuals are what matters. Myself, Andrew, doing a contribution is what is considered that matters. The fact that I work or don't work for some company, largely irrelevant in the free software world, right? Other developers care about the individuals. They learn to trust the individuals. Some companies require their employees, when they make a contribution, to make it as the company and to not have their own name on it at all, to strip their name off and make it as the big corp is making a contribution. That breaks the trust that develops between developers in the community, And you'll find you won't develop the same type of FOSS community involvement if you don't allow the individuals to participate in the project as individuals. Also, FOSS developers are keener to work on a project if their reputation, the individual reputation, is enhanced. They carry that reputation with them between companies. So they'll be more interested in working on the project if it enhances their individual reputation, because that is a valuable asset in their career. So requiring the contributions to be made on behalf of the company and stripping off the individual's names is a bad idea. Permission required for each contribution. It's amazingly common for companies to have a employee agreement when you join the company, and that employee agreement might say something like, every time you make a contribution, if it says anything about free software at all, it might say that if you want to make a contribution to some free software project, you have to get individual permission from your manager per contribution. Each time you make a contribution, you've got to go and get sign-off. You'll find that your employees won't make many contributions. It's just too painful, too much paperwork. They couldn't be bothered, even if it's a simple email. The FOSS development model is very fast, rapid. People have to be able to respond on email lists, send patches quickly. Has to be a low barrier to contribution. Requiring that they talk to their manager each time they make a contribution will provide a large negative factor. It'll be a big disincentive for your employees to actually contribute to that project. If that's what you want, if you don't want them to contribute, maybe that's one way to do it. Version numbered based permission. I've seen this an amazing number of times. It's really quite silly. It's where the legal department of the company signs off and says that yes, we are allowed to use some product. They've done some legal scan and they're checking out a particular product, whatever it is, and they're saying, yes, we can use that product in the company because our lawyers have rubber stamped that and they've looked at the source code and they think this isn't going to be a big danger. And what tends to happen is the lawyers say, we're only approving the use of version 1.6.97 beta, right? And then when you want to use the next version the following month, you've got to go back to the lawyers again, and they rescan the next version to get approval. What ends up happening is your company ends up using a really old version with all the bugs. You don't benefit from the bug fixes. This is the natural inclination of lawyers. Lawyers will try to do this. You need to educate them. You need to teach them that permissions based on version numbers of free software programs don't work. You need to somehow get them to give permission to use the project. Now they might review that permission once every couple of years or something to see if there's been something changed, but doing it based on a version number doesn't work. It also has some other consequences. Sometimes you end up with a project not changing version number just to avoid this silliness, right? The project changes, all the code changes, right? But they just, they've got approval for version 1.3, so they create 1.3.01, 0.02, 0.03, 0.04 and keep going. And the program goes through 10 years of development and every line of code is changed and it's still version 1.3 point something because 1.3 point something is what some lawyer approved. And it makes a nonsense of the approval process because the approval was based on some version of the code. If you put a legal barrier up in front of a free software developer, they'll find some way to work around it, right? Which means that the legal barrier is just an impediment to getting the job done, but it doesn't actually serve the purpose you're trying to make it serve. Patent applications. Good way to make your name mud in the free software community is to apply for patents on the work that you are contributing to the free software project without extensive consultation with the free software community and very, very clear declarations that you are allowing anyone in the free software community to use that patent, right? If you start applying for patents on standards or on some component of a standard, or on some file format or network protocol or some patch that you're contributing to a free software project, your name, your company's name could become a pariah for the rest of eternity. And people will never deal with you again. Because what you are essentially doing is saying, I'm contributing to this project, I want to enhance it, but from then on, no one but me can use the project. That's not very friendly to the free software community, right? Unless you provide a very clear statement on license on exactly the fact that you are allowing anyone in the free software community to use that patented material. And you also should probably explain why you're patenting it. And not why you're patenting in terms of how it benefits your business, but why you're patenting it in terms of how this is going to benefit the free software community. The rest of the free software community probably doesn't care about whether your business survives or fails. They care about whether the project and the community and other contributors survive or fail, not your company. Okay? NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. You might require that in order to get some version of the code, you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. In order to attend some conference, you might sign a non-disclosure agreement. Why are non-disclosure agreements such a problem in the free software community? What happens if you're a contributor to a free software project and you turn up to a conference and they say, you can't come and be part of this conference, and this has happened to me multiple times, you can't be part of this conference unless you sign this non-disclosure agreement. What happens?
Because we share ideas, we share our knowledge that we get from the conference.
Yeah, but there's something else as well. That's very true. It prevents the sharing of ideas potentially, but even if allowed the sharing of ideas, there's some other fundamental problem with an NDA agreement.
Well, you might conflict it later on without even realising.
It might conflict later on, yeah, but it's also just legally complex. Reading and understanding an NDA is complex. The individual free software developer may not have a lawyer in his pocket that he can pull out to read that agreement and see that it's okay. He might instead just decide to walk away, right? He doesn't have the legal resources necessarily to agree or not agree to that agreement. Now, sometimes at plugfests, you do have NDAs, and the NDA might say something like, at this plugfest, if anything you discover inside this plugfest, yep, Bob?
Plugfest.
Explain what a plugfest is. Okay, a plugfest is you've got some particular protocol, HTML, web protocol, or the SMB protocol for file sharing, or the NFS protocol, some networking protocol, and you want to make sure that all the different implementations of this protocol work well together. So you have an annual or biannual meeting where all the people who implement this protocol get together in a room and they test each other's implementation to make sure they all interoperate, they work well together. That's called a plugfest, right? They're very, very common in the free software community as well as in the proprietary community, okay? And often you end up with the same plugfest with some of the people being free software developers and some of them are proprietary developers, right? For example, we have a plugfest every year that the Samba team turns up to, and a whole lot of other companies, maybe half the companies that turn up to the plugfest have free software implementations of the SMB protocol, and the other half have proprietary implementations, okay? And that plugfest has an NDA. That NDA basically says that if you discover nasty bugs in somebody's implementation, then you can't just publish those. What happens in the plugfest stays in the plugfest unless you get permission from the person whose product you're testing. And the reason for those NDAs is otherwise the proprietary vendors won't turn up. Because they'll be afraid that particularly the free software people might discover nasty bugs, publish them on some blog somewhere, and their products will get a bad reputation. The free software authors don't tend to care about that. They think, great, somebody's going to publish bugs, we can fix them. Excellent, good stuff. Their reputation is, they don't worry about bugs being published ruining their reputation. Their reputation comes from the ability to fix those bugs fast, right? Rather than there not being bugs there in the first place. They don't try and pretend there are no bugs in the software. But you often want to interact with other proprietary implementations, and there's maybe an NDA involved. You've got to make sure that the wording of that NDA is friendly towards free software. It has to be very, very clearly worded. Extremely clear English, if it's in English. Extremely clear legal wording so that nobody is put off by it. And you have to distribute the NDA well before the conference so that everyone knows what they're going to be getting into so they can think about it and comment on it before you get there. Don't have them as they walk in the door, hand the NDA and say, sign this or please go back to Australia. Very likely they'll just hop on the plane and go back to Australia and won't sign the agreement. Okay, so special rights for company employees. This is again quite common, either built into the license agreement for the free software project or built into some sort of download requirements or built in some other way where the company that is supporting or developing the code has special rights. Now, that can work. I mean, there's quite a few organisations that have done this, but the disadvantage is it lowers the feeling of trust between the free software community and the company. The other free software developers may be reluctant to contribute to the project because they think, hang on, I'm putting all this free effort in to contribute to this project, and yet this other company gets more rights than what I have to my own code. They get some extra special rights that I don't have, and they might be put off by that and decide, I'll work on some other project instead. And that has harmed a number of free software projects, that sort of attitude. So if you're going to do that, be very sure that you understand the consequences of it and understand that it can have a chilling effect on the development of the free software project by people outside your company. People may be reluctant to contribute if you are reserving special rights for yourself. You have to explain why those special rights are an advantage to the free software community, explained in terms of why it will benefit everyone and not just why it will benefit you. Okay, so that's basically the types of common mistakes. I just wanted to have some time to go through those. There's lots of other mistakes that companies have made when interacting with the free software community, but they're just the ones that I've run across fairly commonly. And please think about them if your company is going to get involved. Try to avoid those types of mistakes, or you may find that your interaction with the FOSS community isn't as successful as you might have hoped. Okay, right, so next lecture. This lecture is about motivation of free software developers. What motivates a FOSS developer? Why do FOSS developers do it? So, first of all, does motivation matter, and what is the aim in motivating somebody? Well, you might want to motivate somebody to start the project. You know, what motivates somebody to start a project in the first place? Then you might want to then motivate people good developers to join the project, attract them to join the project and contribute. And you need to provide some motivation, some benefit to them. It doesn't have to be a financial benefit. Very often, or most often in the free software community, it isn't a financial benefit. But there's lots of other types of benefits. Not everything we do in life we do for money. We often do it for other reasons. And in the FOSS community, the non-monetary reasons are the most common. You might want to get the most out of those developers. You might want to encourage them to work late at night or weekends to get some particular feature out. Right? How do you do that? How do you encourage people along? How do you get them to put more effort in? You might also like to encourage good development practices. How do you encourage developers to test their code before they commit it? How do you encourage them to use the right formatting in the coding in the code? How do you encourage them to develop good documentation, or to track down bugs, or work on other parts of the less sexy parts of the project? How do you provide those motivations? Now, are these motivations the same as well for proprietary software? Many of the motivating elements for proprietary software are the same as for free software. Proprietary software companies often find that many of the same types of motivating techniques work, but proprietary software companies also motivate their employees by paying them money. And that motivation is usually not available in the free software community. Now, sometimes that monetary compensation can actually be a negative. People treat it as sort of a work that they don't really want to do rather than play. If you can get people to treat the software development as something that they enjoy, they're likely to do it better, and they're likely to do more of it. Okay, so there's usually no employer-employee relationship between the free software project and the contributors, and that can be good or bad. Sometimes you might think that, we really need that release manager to get that release out. Well, if he wants to go on a holiday, he's going to go on a holiday. And you can't do anything about it. That's fine, right? You've just got to cope with that. And it can be good in that people often put more effort into their hobbies than they put into their jobs, and more thought into their hobbies than their jobs. But it also can be bad in that if you really need to get a release out, somebody else in the community might need to get it done. Okay, so this is the canonical motivation. This is sort of the classic motivation in the free software community. And this comes from the essay The Cathedral and Bazaar by Eric Raymond. Every good work of software starts by scratching a developer's personal itch. Alright? That's not quite true. It's not quite true that every good piece of software starts with scratching an itch, but a large number of them come from scratching an itch. What does it mean to scratch an itch? What does it mean? Surely it doesn't mean people actually doing this because they've got lice, right? There's something else. What's scratching an itch?
It's what he wants, actually. What he wants?
Yeah, doing something that you need. Meeting a personal need, right? So if you're using some editor, and that editor has a feature, you'd really like it to have that feature, then you might scratch the itch by adding that feature. Or you think you need some piece of software to do some particular task. You scratch the itch, you satisfy your craving for that piece of software by writing it yourself, right? A lot of software in the free software community is written by users. It's written by the people who need the software. That's different to the proprietary software community. In the proprietary software community, it's more common for the software to be written by a company who thinks that somebody needs the software. Whereas in the free software community, it's usually somebody who does need the software who starts writing it, and then they release it and other people who also needed that software start contributing. Right? So it's slightly different basis. So scratching an itch, you'll often see on the mailing list, people talking about scratching an itch. And this is what they're referring to. It's not because we're all lice-ridden. It's because that in the free software community, there's this idea of meeting your own personal needs, personal requirements for software by developing it yourself. Opportunity to hack. Free software provides an opportunity to work on a wider range of software than pretty much anything else. Okay? All of you have now, or most of you have picked a project you're going to work on for the next week and for the next few weeks for your assessments. Now, if you think about the range of software that is available, so some of you are working on various profiling tools, there's people who are working on editors, there's people who are working on all sorts of things. If free software didn't exist, and you wanted to work on software like that, what would you have to have done? You'd have to go and be hired by a company that makes that software, or you have to write it all yourself. So with free software, there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of different software packages out there. Free software provides the opportunity for developers, people who like to program. Programmers tend to enjoy programming. That's why they became programmers, right? They become, usually, some might have done it because they thought computer science was a good way to make money, but usually underneath, they are hackers or they are developers or geeks at heart, and they actually enjoy cutting code. They actually enjoy doing the work involved in developing software, writing documentation or whatever. And there are people who enjoy writing tests and documentation. I love writing test suites. A bit perverse that way. And so I enjoy what other people may not enjoy, and I develop a lot of test suites. Other people like writing documentation, and they have the opportunity to write documentation for a huge range of software projects in the free software community. So FOSS offers them an opportunity to do what they love doing. But it's also interesting as a career starter. Some of the motivations for people, if you're a computer science student, imagine you're a first or second year computer science student. Now you could get through your degree and work on just the projects inside your degree. Work on the various C programs, Java programs, or whatever, okay? But say you wanted to get industry level experience working on operating system kernels, on editors, on large libraries. You wanted to get experience, real world type experience on big software projects. What would be your opportunity to do that? Well, you're not going to get it in an undergraduate computer science degree. They tend to work on little toy projects mostly, or on large free software projects, right? But you could get it by doing, say, getting a summer job with some existing company. In which case, getting an internship like that is quite competitive. It might be quite difficult to get into an internship. It also might be that there's no company that lives in your area that is willing to hire a summer holiday intern to work on whatever project you're interested in working on. But with free software, you have the ability to take up free software development as a hobby, and that enhances your experience as a software engineer. And that experience is then directly related to how well you do in your career. It enhances your career opportunities, because you can then say you've worked on the scheduler for a kernel, a real one that people are using. You've worked on a disk driver, you've worked on some important Java library or whatever, and there are tens of thousands of people using your code. That will impress a potential employer far more than saying you got a distinction in some Java course at a university, right? So a lot of people actually get involved in free software partly as a way to gain developer experience, and it is a very valuable method. Proprietary software generally isn't available to be studied. Some is, but not very often. FOSS software is available and covers pretty much all areas of computing. That wasn't true 15 years ago. 15, 20 years ago, there were lots of areas where free software didn't cover. There were very few, for example, fancy games for free software. Right now there are. It's very hard now to name an area of computing where there isn't an example of a complex, large free software project that implements that area of computing. And you can also, there's no need to move to where the company is that makes the software, and you can work and study it part-time and learn about it. Okay, programming also can be addictive. Good developers tend to really enjoy programming, and so the task itself of developing the software, developing the free software, becomes its own reward. So the actual development task is the motivation itself, why people want to work on it. It's highly visible, and a good programmer in the FOSS world can quickly gain recognition, which is partly why people are so keen on getting credit, to make sure that their names are highlighted in the contribution, because they can gain recognition in the industry, and that recognition is then extremely valuable. Okay, EgoBoo. Anyone heard of EgoBoo before? Right? EgoBoo is this term, it's actually been in use for a very long time, but it was popularised again by Eric Raymond, and refers to the ego boosting you get from peer recognition. It's basically your peers saying that your work is good. Right? So I write a bit of code and somebody writes to me and says, hey, that's excellent, what a great hack, you know, what a nice bit of code. Right? Great hack is actually a compliment in the free software community. You really need to look up the definition of hack in the jargon file. There's a thing called the jargon file that explains all the different terminology used in the hacker community. Anyway, so EgoBoo refers to the ego boosting from peer recognition, and I suspect that EgoBoo is one of the biggest motivators in the FOSS community. It's what keeps people going, because their peers, other people that they respect, say that they like what's being done. When your patch gets accepted, the first time you contribute a patch to a FOSS project, and the project accepts your patch, you'll probably get a great warm feeling inside. Isn't that great? Doesn't that feel good? They accepted your patch and it's now going to be distributed as part of this project, right? That's an EgoBoo. That warm feeling is an ego boost that you're getting back by somebody else, a respected member of the FOSS community, accepting your work, all right? And this is what leads to the strong cultural emphasis on giving fair credit and recognition. Because EgoBoo is such an important motivator, if you don't give people fair credit and recognition, people will soon stop contributing to your project. Because you're not giving them the fix, right? The little boost they get from the contribution, you're not giving them that when they make the contribution. And the more you can give them that, without going over the top, the more you can give them that boost and credit and recognition and thanks for their contribution, then the more they will tend to contribute. So for example, projects, when they put out a new release, they very often put out a change log listing all the new features, and next to it the name of the person who added that feature, who did the work to make that happen, right? And that is then publicising that person's ability, and he gets an ego boost from the peers. All the users of that software think, oh, that person's done some really great work, I love that new feature, right? This ego-boosting benefit of developing software is usually completely lacking in proprietary software. And it's one of the big benefits that free software has over proprietary software, and why free software can sometimes develop faster, because humans like getting credit. Humans like getting their ego boosted by their peers recognising their work. It's just part of how we're built. At least most people are built anyway. Okay. Contrast with self-recognition. FOSS has a strong tradition of self-deprecation. So, congratulating yourself about writing good code is generally not seen as being a good thing, right? People will be turned off by that. It's your peers recognising your work. Whereas in the proprietary software world, the companies tend to say that their own products are good. In the free software world, people developers tend to often say that their own product is terrible, and then they wait for the other people in the community to say, oh, actually it's pretty good, it's better than that one, or whatever, right? So it's a different attitude, and it's quite an important difference between the two communities. Also, promotion of free software tends to come from its users, not from its developers. Right? The users tend to be the ones that say that software is good and they promote it via word of mouth, rather than the developers saying, this is the best thing since sliced bread. Okay? So how do you think FOSS projects can maximise the ego boo benefits to rewards to motivate developers? What, can you guys think of some ways of maximising the amount of credit and recognition you give to developers?
Make sure it's easy to see on the project website who the contributors are.
Make sure it's easy to see who the contributors are. Yep, that's good. Anything else?
I've seen some sites tend to give developers little ratings, little kudos ratings.
Yes, kudos ratings. NetFilter IP Tables does that, I believe. And I think the Launchpad system also does that. So basically, each time somebody makes a contribution, they get a certain number of points for their contribution. And the people with the most points are displayed up on the website saying, this person's a great contributor, right? Because he's got X many points. It's a great system for giving back through enhancing the ego boosting to make people more motivated to work on the software. How else can you do things? I mentioned one in an earlier lecture, but you can see it on the back of this laptop. Right? Swag. T-shirts, hats, they're dirt cheap. Stickers, give them out to developers of the project. It's amazing what people will do for a t-shirt. Incredible, right? I've got a nice example of that later. And you know, $5, $10 t-shirt, you can get, you know, hundreds of hours of programming out of somebody for that. It's amazing the value you can get. Okay, there's lots of ways to motivate developers. As a project leader, you need to think about this. You need to think about the psychology of your developers. You need to think about how you are going to maximize the rewards they get. Because there are real rewards in developing free software, but they just aren't monetary rewards usually. So you have to maximize all the other rewards to try to get good development happening and the right number of developers contributing to the project. So you need to think about this all the time. You need to monitor that the project is one that will attract new developers and continue being a healthy project by ensuring that you appropriately credit and thank the contributors. Okay, constructive procrastination. This is another great motivator. I think that one of the great powering forces behind the free software movement is procrastinating PhD students or master's students. Right? Students who really should be off doing their work or writing their thesis or whatever, but instead they're trying to avoid doing that. So what do? Well, they're programmers. What do programmers do when they're procrastinating? They program. And what are they going to program on? Oh, there's this free software project over there, shiny. Let's go and play with it. Let's contribute this patch. Right? This has led to all sorts of projects. My own work, and I started a whole bunch of projects when I was a procrastinating PhD student. Linus Torvalds started the Linux kernel as a procrastinating student in Helsinki. Right? The whole kernel was started because basically a student with more time on his hands than really he should have had, and he decided to develop a whole new kernel. Right, you can develop any bit of software as a procrastinating student. The power of procrastination should not be underestimated. So don't necessarily tell your supervisors that you're planning on doing this. They don't always approve, as I discovered. So sometimes the FOSS projects can then become their career. It's perfectly possible. They might end up even teaching FOSS. Who knows? So students tend to procrastinate anyway. I'm sure you've all procrastinated. Everyone who here has been procrastinating to some degree in the past few months? Yeah, pretty much everyone, right? How many of you procrastinated constructively? Doing something constructive in your procrastination?
Only half.
A few? Maybe half? Some of them. Some, okay, great. Well, that's already some contributions. Okay, it's really common. And if you're going to procrastinate, you might as well procrastinate on something that you enjoy. That's fairly obvious. Otherwise, why the hell are you procrastinating, right? Second thing is, you might as well procrastinate in some way that is constructive. It'll help your career, it'll help your knowledge and understanding, it'll help you become a better programmer. Why not deliberately choose some constructive way to procrastinate? You could do it by going and helping out in some community project, or you could contribute to a FOSS project. Great way to procrastinate. Good.
And everyone knows what procrastination means, right?
Yes, work avoidance. You know what procrastination is? Anyone not understand?
You ever do today what you can do tomorrow, and if you don't get round to it, then worry about it next Friday.
That's right, the summary. Yes, procrastination is the art of avoiding doing the work that you're supposed to be doing. Okay? And it's very common for students to try to, they put off their assignments to the last day. Right? I imagine on May the 21st, the day before they're all due for this course, there'll be a whole lot of people staying up late doing their final bits of their assignments. That's because you've been procrastinating. You've been avoiding doing it till the last minute. That's normal, right? But hopefully, when the procrastination you do for this course will be constructive procrastination. You'll actually be getting involved in some FOSS project and doing something useful. Even better if it's actually the FOSS project you're supposed to be working on for this course. That'd be great.
I like to call it procrastineering, sort of raise it to an engineering standard.
Right, procrastineering, that's right. Yes, very good. Yeah.
But
Okay.
that's a serious point though, isn't it? That if you're supposed to be working on a particular project,
Yes.
your procrastination might involve you actually avoiding working on that project and working on some other project instead.
That's right.
Because this is the one you're supposed to be doing.
That's right.
And
And there's this strange psychology where if you're supposed to be doing it, you try and avoid doing it. And that's partly why free software can sometimes develop faster than proprietary ones, because the employees of the company are supposed to be working on the product. So what do? They procrastinate. They try and work on anything else. They make up some reason why they shouldn't work on it. Right? Public servants are a classic example of this. Any public servants here? So, but all employees tend to do this, tend to procrastinate, avoid their work. Okay? Free software projects, they tend not to be employed to work on it, so the work on the free software project tends to be the target of the procrastination rather than what they're trying to avoid. And that can sometimes be a larger amount of work than what they're actually paid to do, which is great for the free software projects, not so good for the employers. Okay, company supported. This is a new trend, started in the dot-com boom in the late 90s. Company-supported developers now make up a very large part of the larger FOSS projects. Most of the contributions to the Linux kernel these days are from people who who are paid by some company to work on it. Most of the contributions to most of the large projects, in fact, are made by paid contributors. And the majority of FOSS developers aren't paid to do the work, but the particularly large projects, the ones that have a lot of commercial significance, like the Linux kernel, there tends to be a whole lot of people paid to work on them full time. Now the key to that working is that those developers have to carry over the attitudes and the methodologies that they learned before they were paid to work on it. Right? They learn to work with the community as a volunteer, and then they're paid to work full time, and it only really works successfully if they continue the same methodologies and community involvement they started with. Right? And this is why at the end here I talk about internal reassignment. It's been distressingly common for a company to say, we need some work on this free software project to happen, and they'll pick any warm body, or any employee that they think isn't doing something else and say, you go and work on that free software project. Assign them to it. Now, in many, many cases that doesn't work. They don't work very effectively, and sometimes that employee, if they were previously working on proprietary software, will try to carry over the methodologies they use for proprietary software into the free software community. And if they try and do that, they'll often get a very harsh reception in the free software community. If they try and force through changes, because they just force through things by fiat, saying this change should be put in regardless, and they don't listen to feedback, they don't discuss it on the mailing list, they drop what's known as a code bomb. I think I mentioned code bombs the other day. So they drop enormous changes without any discussion with the community. That's the sort of thing that often happens in proprietary software development, right? In the free software world, that isn't what's done. And so if you try to reassign internal developers that used to work on proprietary development and tell them to work on free software development, they must be re-educated. They must learn how to work with the FOSS community, how to interact with the community. Otherwise, it will turn out very badly. You just won't get good value for money, right? You won't get good work out of them. Okay, so lots of developers at large IT firms like HP, IBM and Sun, etc. Are paid to work on free software, tens of thousands of them in fact. Who do they hire? When a company is looking for somebody to work on a free software project, there's usually a strong preference for those with a proven record in that project or a related project. And particularly, that can demonstrate they know how to work with the free software community. Most of those have already worked on FOSS as a hobby in the past, and now it's just becoming their career. And if they haven't worked on FOSS as a hobby, or they haven't worked on FOSS projects in the past, then it often turns out quite badly. World domination. This is one of the motivations that's often talked about in free software community. People say, half in jest, half not in jest, that we are seeking world domination. Right? The free software community wants to dominate the world and wants everyone to use free software. And it's sort of half a joke. Some free software developers are strongly motivated by beating the incumbent, right, in whatever field. In databases, people who work on MySQL and PostgreSQL might be strongly motivated to beat Oracle, to make their database more popular or better or faster or more robust or whatever than Oracle, who could be seen as the incumbent database. Other people who work on, say, desktop software might try and make their desktop interface better than the Apple Mac interface or Microsoft's interface. So beating the incumbent, right, and the associated pride of doing something better than the incumbent in the IT world can be a strong motivation. Of course, when the incumbent is dead, you've got to have a new motivation. And that's happened in some cases where free software has started to dominate some area of the industry, and then they start competing with other free software projects instead and try to do better than the other free software project who approaches things from a slightly different fashion. And you get competition between free software implementations of the same protocol, like the editor wars, you know, Emacs and VI and that sort of thing. But there is also this world domination theme, which is this common theme in FOSS humour. People talk about, you know, what's the aim of free software? The aim is world domination. And it's partly a joke, but it does have some elements of truth, trying to beat the rest of the industry to prove that free software can be as good or better than anything else is a motivation for many developers.
I've just pulled up Launchpad
Yep.
on the screen here, and I've got Ubuntu bugs. Bug
Yep.
number 1 for Ubuntu is Microsoft has majority market share.
That's right. They've listed it as bug number 1, and that bug needs to be fixed.
Reported by Mark Shuttleworth.
That's right. The founder of Ubuntu reported the first bug for Ubuntu as being Microsoft dominates the desktop market for operating systems, and that's a bug that needs fixing. And that bug is going to take many years to fix. But it's interesting. It's an example of this world domination theme, right?
And
And
it's
it's
still
not.
listed as critical.
It's a critical bug,
Still
right?
critical.
But it's not release critical, is it? They can't do a release without fixing it first.
Tell you what, they've got an awful lot of developers on it.
Yes, that's right. A lot of people indeed are working towards that. Yeah, yeah. Well, it helps that Mark's a billionaire, you know. Yeah. Anyway, so there is some elements of truth to this world domination idea, and it's a common theme you'll run across. But understand also that it's partly just a joke. Okay. What about short-term motivation? How do you reward FOSS developers in the short term? And this is key, particularly when you're starting out a project. The speed of reward is important for FOSS developers, for FOSS projects. Programmers like to program, but they also have another common trait. That other common trait is a short attention span. Okay? Programmers are often like little kids. You know, 5-minute attention spans if you're lucky, you know, watching cartoons, right? And the short attention span means if it takes too long to configure or develop or try or do something with a piece of software, they'll give up and get distracted by some other bit of software and go off and do something else instead, right? Different people have different attention spans, but a lot of people have a short attention span. So what does that mean? It means that when you first release a free software project, you have to ensure that the person downloading it gets some gratification, some reward, some demonstration of the usefulness of the program fairly quickly. So they can download it and run it and they, oh, hey, that looks cool, I'll get into that. And then they might spend the next week playing with it, that's fine. But they need that initial reward, that initial positive feedback to get things started. The same is true with developers. It's not just users, developers as well. When you first release a project, the usual rule is you don't announce the project till you have something runnable. You don't announce the project till you have some runnable code. It doesn't have to be perfect. It can be as bug-ridden as anything. It can crash after 2 minutes. Doesn't matter. It has to be something that gives some positive feedback to a programmer who looks at it and says, hey, that's cool, that's good, I can see where this is going, I can see the example of what this project might do. And they're then tempted to work on the project and fix the bugs, right, to get involved. In fact, the program being more bug-ridden and being less complete when you first release it can be an advantage. Why is that?
Gives people something to hook onto that they're interested in trying to fix.
It gives something to hook onto, and in particular, it means that the people aren't so, what would you say, aren't so put off, aren't so, intimidated, exactly, thank you. They aren't so intimidated by the project. If the project is pretty much perfect, this wonderful project, they might think that, gosh, I'm not good enough to make a contribution. It's far too hard. But if the project has some obvious flaws in it, right, tempting little flaws that some programmer thinks that, yes, I could go and whip up something and fix that bug quickly, that he might then submit that bug and fix that one problem, and then you'll find he's hooked. And he's then a developer for the next 10 years, right? So including a few bugs and making it not quite perfect, it needs to be runnable. You've got to get that balance just right. Some sort of positive feedback so you can see it vaguely does something interesting, but not perfect when you release it. A lot of developers, and particularly a lot of companies when they're first releasing, they have this embarrassment factor where they don't want to release the code until it's perfect. If you wait till it's perfect to release the code, you won't get any other contributors.
That's huge in government. Almost everybody I speak to in federal government who has a project that they are going to open source it as soon as it's done.
As soon as it's done. And of course, that means they might as well not bother.
Yeah.
Right? You're not going to get other people contributing. You want to have, in fact, you could deliberately add some bugs, right? Actually add some things that are easy to fix to encourage people to get involved. That could work. But of course, there's usually plenty of bugs in most software, so you don't need to add any. But start early. Start early in the development process. Release it just at the point where it becomes tempting for somebody else to have a play with it. All right, that's the ideal point. Okay. So the speed of reward. The reward could be seeing something work. The reward can also be getting patches accepted, and the speed of response can be critical. If you submit a patch and it's 2 weeks later that somebody responds and says thank you, that doesn't give nearly the same reward as the next morning somebody coming back and saying yes, that's great and it's in the tree, and you get this much bigger boost from a faster reward coming back. It's just some aspect of psychology, and it's just a fact of what happens. I've noticed that if I make a contribution, people come back and say that's great, you tend to make the next contribution once you've got the feedback from the last one. So things start rolling along faster if you have fast feedback. That means that project leaders and project maintainers need to be careful to give back feedback on patches as quickly as possible, right, to encourage more development. Okay, faster release cycles. Sometimes there's this quote that free software works on internet time. What do people mean by that?
There's always somebody awake somewhere in the world.
Or is somebody awake? And it's this general idea that sort of development on the internet happens very, very quickly. Free software projects often develop extraordinarily rapidly, particularly there might be bursts of development, right? Where you get multiple releases in a week or multiple releases in a day. And you get huge numbers of patches going in. People get these coding fevers where they sort of code all night to do some great thing, add some great feature. That's really common. And that fast release cycle, you have to make sure you can feed that release cycle. Having a public source code management system means you don't need to wait for a release. It means that people who are interested can watch the updates and get the latest changes. How many of you have done an SVN update on some of the projects here in the lab the last week? Right? You saw that there were changes that came in from the previous day. So there have been changes over on the scale of every day or two. There's changes coming into the project. And in a proprietary project, you don't have that. It's every 6 months, a year. You get this much faster, rapid release cycle, and you need to be able to feed that by providing the infrastructure to allow that fast cycle to happen. And that's the main purpose of the source code management system, to feed that release cycle, to make people be able to very quickly get feedback on what's happening. Okay, it's also very important for new projects. Developers are attracted when they can get immediate positive feedback when you're starting a project. And as I already said, the usual rule is you don't announce till you have some basic runnable code so people can get the positive feedback. Okay, I mentioned t-shirts before, and this is something that really epitomises free software development, and it's quite strange, the psychology of this. We've used a number of ways. You occasionally see things happening, what I generally call a t-shirt contest. Sometimes it may not be a t-shirt, it might be some other, it might be a sticker, it might be a case of beer, it might be all sorts of different things, it might be the reward. Basically what it is offering a very, very small reward for some enormous task. Alright? I'll give you $1 if you repaint my whole house. Alright? Normally people would laugh and go away. For some reason in the free software community it works. You can offer some trivial reward and get a lot of work. I'll give you some examples. We were trying to solve a particularly interesting problem in the Samba development where we were trying to represent a very complex series of logic statements in a simple form. We were trying to understand the locking mechanisms used in the Windows SMB protocol. And there were a total of 2,300 odd combinations of locks that we discovered, and we couldn't understand the underlying principles. Where did it come from? We wanted a simple function that represented that. So we had a t-shirt competition, right? None of us could work it out. We announced on the mailing list that we will send a Samba team t-shirt to the person who provides the best representation. What happened? A whole bunch of electrical engineers and mathematicians and things popped out of the woodwork that we've never heard of before. And they applied techniques like Carnot maps and various regression analysis and all these types of things. And a great discussion popped up, right, on how to solve this interesting bit of mathematical problem. And the person who won, strangely enough, was probably in my lab here, Paul McCarris, my ex-supervisor. He was also an electrical engineer. And he won a t-shirt, right? So he put in all this effort, and a whole lot of other people put in this effort for one t-shirt, effort that if we'd tried to pay a programmer to do it, they would have spent months working on it. It was great. Similarly, we've done it for cryptographic problems. We've sometimes had some cryptographic algorithm we've had to work out. In order to interoperate with some other product, we have to understand the cryptography that that product uses. Solving cryptographic problems is notoriously difficult, right? Cryptographers spend their lives working on some small cryptographic problem. It's very, very difficult. But it's the sort of thing that scales well to large numbers of potential contributors. So what we do is we put together what we call a crypto challenge, right? And the key is to word the challenge correctly. We put together a tarball and a website, we announce the challenge, and we make it very, very simple to use. I'll show you one. So here's the, let's see, why have I got that? Samba Express challenge. This is it, Express challenge. So we put together this tarball, and this tarball has a readme that basically says what the aim is. And you've got to make it very, very simple, okay? So you need to say that basically you slot in your code here, a function that does that, and then when you type this command, it should say, okay, you've done it. So they know when they've succeeded. You put it out as a challenge and you offer something like a sticker or a t-shirt and say that when the first person to offer a solution that makes this program come up with the right answer, right, gets the t-shirt or the sticker or whatever, you get an amazing number of people who happen to have cryptography as their hobby coming out and trying to solve the problem. And you might have spent months otherwise trying to solve it, and you find the solution in a couple of days. Turns out that somebody's got a supercomputer at their office and they ran a supercomputer over it for a few hours and eventually, you know, just used brute force to find the key. That sort of thing actually happens. You just don't have the resources to do it yourself, but if you put it out to the community and offer a t-shirt, you often find the solution pops out. So it's a surprising aspect of the free software community. It's something that just doesn't happen in the proprietary software world. You don't see Oracle saying, we'll give a t-shirt to the first person who can fix this bug in Oracle, right? It'd be highly embarrassing. They don't know how to fix it themselves. In the free software community, we happily admit, we don't know how to fix it. We're hoping somebody else does. Hey, we'll give you this $10 t-shirt if you find it, right? And you use the donations you get to the project to buy the t-shirts to send to people. So we get donations, our donations to Samba are paid for our stickers and our t-shirts and our hats and that sort of thing. Okay, so you have to have a well-defined problem, you have to have an interesting technical challenge, and you have to offer some publicity, some ego boo, to the winner. So their name goes up on the homepage saying, yes, this person solved that problem and won the t-shirt, maybe a photo of them with the t-shirt, right? Great, that'll encourage people for the next challenge to come along and do the challenge. Okay, so that's it on FOSS motivation. There's lots more that one can say about it, but let's just sort of give you a bit of an overview of the flavour of how to motivate people, and try to think about those things in your own interactions with the FOSS projects. When you're writing up your reports on your projects, think about how does the project you're working on try to give positive feedback and motivate the developers who are working on the project. How do you feel about the contribution? Are you getting any positive feedback? Could the project do it better? Are there ways that the project could motivate their developers more? Why do people contribute? What is motivating the other developers to contribute to that project? Think about all those things when you're interacting with the projects in the lab. Great, afternoon tea time.
I think the authority of the project is part of the T-shirt challenge feedback.
Sorry?
The authority or the prestige of the project is
Yes.
part of the T-shirt challenge.